4, 3. Whoops, we got an issue. Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2. Yes, and we're live. Hello,
hey.
Lindsey. What's happening?
Not much. Thanks
Pleasure
for having
to meet
me here.
you.
Yeah, good to meet you. I'm the girl who tags you in all the disgusting medical history photos, and
Well,
I'm really looking forward to grossing out your audience today.
I'm looking forward to you doing that as well. You have fascinated me with your Twitter page, and you first of all, you are a doctor, right?
Well, I'm a PhD. I can't save anybody's life.
Okay.
I could perform, Victorian surgery amputation or something.
I think anybody can, right?
Yeah.
Is that
probably
a real one? That
no,
saw?
this is a prop.
Oh.
So this was a real fun thing to get through customs when I was coming in from Britain. It's a Victorian amputation saw. It's called the clockwork saw. And for people who are just listening, it's a circular saw, and there would have been a crank that you wound it with, and then you'd release it, and it would spin sort of automatically.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and the idea was that it would make it faster. But the reason why I love this saw so much is that it was a massive failure. And I don't think we talk about failure enough in science and medicine. All the things that work, there's a lot of things that don't work. And so this guy who invented this saw, when he tried it out, it was spinning so fast that he took off his assistant's fingers.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
A bit of an oops. It never got out of prototype phase, so I had to recreate it for my YouTube channel.
Now, in those old days when they didn't have antibiotics and antiseptic and
right, yeah.
When they saw someone's leg off or something like that, how many times do those people live?
Well, you could pull through the operation. That was one part of it. But then, of course, you could die of postoperative infection.
Yeah.
So my book, The Butchering Art, really focuses on this one guy named Joseph Lister who applies germ theory and develops antisepsis, so germ fighting techniques.
Right.
And most people don't know who he is, but they know the product Listerine. Mm-hmm. So Listerine was named after him. But I always tell people that, so basically, Lister was a British surgeon, and he came to America in 1876 to convince the medical community of germs. And there was a guy in the audience, and he decided to create this product, Listerine. But it wasn't even a mouthwash in the 19th century. It was used to treat gonorrhea.
Whoa.
So, but also, I don't endorse that. Don't throw a little Listerine on it.
Yeah, go to a doctor, man.
Yeah, I could just see all the comments already on the YouTube. She told me to throw Listerine on it. No, I don't endorse that, and I'm sure the Listerine company is not too pleased I'm talking about that either.
So Listerine now just is for breath, right?
Yeah.
That's all it does.
Yeah, it's an antiseptic mouthwash. And
is it even any good for you? Like, is it good to kill all that stuff inside your mouth? Like,
I'm not a real doctor.
Right, but you're a medical historian.
I'm a medical historian. I would say that dentists would say that Listerine's still a good product.
Do you use it, Jamie?
Of bacteria. Yeah.
All right.
Form of it, something like that. I just use something. I don't know if it's Crest
Some
or
mouthwash.
Listerine, something.
Well, you got to switch to Listerine now
Yeah,
in
now you
honor
do.
of Joseph Lister.
So how did he know? How did he know that there was germs, that they were real?
So let me take you back to sort of before he walks on the scene. So these operating theaters, they were filled to the rafters with ticketed spectators. People actually bought tickets to see someone get their leg hacked off.
Oh, God.
I know.
How much did it cost?
You know what? No one's asked me that. I don't know how much a ticket would cost for that spectacle. Now I really need to look into that. But
God,
people would
pay to watch that.
They pay, but look what they pay to watch now, right?
Yeah,
we
I
could
guess.
say,
Yeah.
And when I sent you my book, I signed it and I said I thought that being strapped to the Victorian operating theater was the original fear factor because I can't imagine anything worse than being strapped to this table.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about before anesthesia, so you're fully awake. And one of my favorite surgeons is this guy named Robert Liston. He's 6'2". He's really tall for the 19th century. And he could hold you down with his left arm and he could take your leg off in about 30 seconds.
Oh, Jesus.
Which is what you'd want. That's what you'd want.
You would, but that's still a long time.
It is, yeah. I mean, if we just sat here for 30 seconds, with dead airtime, and you could think about, hacking through that leg.
Or just scream for 30 seconds.
I wonder how many people would be at the end of this podcast. Like 5 people would be still out there listening. So he was incredibly fast. He was known as the fastest knife in the West End. He would walk in. He was a showman. So he'd walk in and he'd say, "Time me, gentlemen." And you could just hear the ripple of pocket watches as they came out.
There's a
there
drawing
he is.
of him.
Yep, there he is.
And he's using a knife in that photo.
Yeah, so actually the Liston knife that he invented was this long-bladed knife, which they think Jack the Ripper may have also used, which is why those rumors are that Jack the Ripper may have been a medical practitioner. But
that was a really common thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're never going to know who he is.
Right.
It's unknowable. We're still kind of obsessed with this.
I've heard so many different versions of that.
Yeah, and recently there was some kind of bogus DNA test of a shawl that they said belonged to one of the victims, but it's impossible to prove the provenance of the object.
Right.
But that was Liston, so he's 6'2", he's really tall. One of my favorite stories is he would go so fast that as he was switching instruments, he'd hold these bloody instruments in his mouth just to illustrate how different this was.
Jesus.
That's the face I wanted. I wanted to just be totally disgusted through this whole segment. And as he was switching instruments, he accidentally cut off his assistant's finger. And then as he was switching instrument, he slashed the coat of a spectator. And the assistant died of gangrene, the patient died of gangrene, and the spectator died of fright. So it's jokingly
died of fright.
He
just
died
a little
of fright.
bit of blood.
Well, he got slashed with the jacket, and I guess he had a heart attack from the stress. And so it's jokingly referred to as the only operation with a 300% mortality rate. He did a good job that day. He killed three people in one.
When you say slashed, you mean he cut the spectator or just got blood on them?
No, he just cut their coat. As he was kind of switching instruments.
That's all it took to kill someone? I thought people were tougher back then.
Well, not that guy. Now he lives forever in the butchering art as that guy.
So he died of fright. He had a heart attack?
He must have had a heart attack. It said he died of fright.
Maybe that wasn't real.
Maybe
it
wasn't.
Seems like horseshit. Doesn't it a little bit? Like
Are
the
you
guy
calling
dying?
me out?
No, not you. No. The historical
No, of course,
record.
These stories, they get blown out of
Hyperbole
proportion. Yeah.
It just seems like you cut someone's jacket, they're not going to die.
Well, it's a stressful situation. People are getting their limbs hacked off. Your blood pressure would be really high.
Maybe. I get it.
And these theaters were, the floor of the operating theater was crowded as well. So they'd have to actually clear the floor sometimes. So you can imagine, you're strapped to this. And the leg wasn't the worst thing. So one of the tweets that you shared of mine, which your platform seemed to enjoy quite a lot, and sold me a lot of books, by the way, thank you,
awesome.
was this story about this guy who was suffering from a bladder stone, and it got stuck in his urethra. And so out of desperation, he stuck a nail down his penis, and he hammered it to break it up.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, and people went nuts on your platform for that story. So they obviously are ready for this interview.
How did that work again? That didn't work, right?
It did not work. No, he died.
Yeah, whoops.
That guy definitely died. But it really illustrates how desperate people were back then and how few options they had.
Yeah, there's the image of it. I don't think you're allowed to show this on YouTube, Jamie. You get banned.
Oh, that was the one I sent.
Definitely a medical.
I'm sure it is
a medical
but
image.
I don't think you could show that on YouTube.
Really?
That's clearly a penis.
There's penises and breasts on YouTube.
I sent Jamie a lot of penis photos.
I think they look at us more carefully.
All right. Well, it's not on there. I'm just.
Okay, good. Tell folks if
I'll
they
tweet
want
it
to see
later
it.
for people who want
There
to
you
see
go.
that.
If people want to see it, well, Twitter is the most open of all platforms. They let you get away with almost everything. You can have porn on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any problems with Instagram. I put that stuff up, but But maybe again,
some things get removed from Instagram. It's really kind of interesting. It seems to be dependent upon how many people complain.
Yeah, probably. There's always those people out there looking to be offended.
I just think they just want to do something. They just want to press that button.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm mad.
There we go.
Yeah.
I know. I get, at this point, there's so many objects that can cause offense, of course, with medical history. And it's there's a lot of dark history, body snatchers and things like that. And I'm a firm believer that we should tell these stories openly because they happened and medicine and science grew as a result of it. But they're not easy subjects to discuss with an audience, especially when you have so many characters on Twitter and you're trying to get out a complex idea. But
right, and also you're not just there's a lot of Twitter pages that I follow where people are just trying to gross people out. But
Yes.
you're actually educating people about the history, and we also should be really thankful that these people went through all this stuff
Oh my
so
gosh,
that we
yeah.
don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say to my audience, so I've been going around the world sort of demolishing romantic notions about people what might think about what it's like to live in the past, because it was pretty bad. And I have visuals as well, and I've had 4 men faint so far. It's always been men. It's just a commentary right now. It's
Maybe
always
they're
been men.
Ancestors of that bitch that
Yeah,
got his jacket cut and died.
It was that guy. Yeah, those weaklings coming to my lecture. And I think what it is, though, is people think I'm going to see something gross, so I'm not going to eat. And then their blood sugar plummets. So it's not really the grossness, but they're not really prepared, you know. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and they're standing sometimes. I give lectures at this incredible museum called the Old Operating Theatre in London. It's the second oldest in the world. And so you have to stand because it's like a Victorian operating theatre. And so people lock their knees or whatever.
Oh, wow. So you give actual lectures in the real theaters where they used to cut people?
Yeah. I did my book launch there. And if people want to see it, I filmed sort of a theatrical scene of a young Lister attending an operation in that theater, and it's on my YouTube channel called Under the Knife. And I really want to get this made into a movie. I'm trying to come into Hollywood and convince Hollywood that this Quaker surgeon from the Victorian period deserves this cinema feature. But it is an epic story. He saved more lives than any other person to ever live.
Look, it is an epic story. And for anybody who's ever gone through operations, and I've gone through several of them, we owe those people a massive debt.
Yeah. You don't have to be awake, strapped to the table.
I have both my knees reconstructed and you wake up and they're fixed.
Yeah,
Yay.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
And in the past, before anesthesia, a lot of times patients were sat in chairs, so they weren't laid down. And they were sat in these very high chairs so that their feet dangled, so they couldn't brace against the knife. If you think about like pushing off with your feet,
of course.
There's a story about a guy named Robert Penman, and I know we have images, and I'm sure YouTube won't take those down. He comes to Robert Liston, the fastest knife in the West End, in 1828, and he has this huge facial tumor growing. I mean, it's been growing for about 8 years. It's taking up his whole face. He can't breathe now. And Liston looks at him and says, I can't do this operation, which is tantamount to a death sentence. But he goes up to Scotland and he goes, there he is.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible when you see that painting. So Penman goes up to Scotland and he sees a guy named James Syme. And Syme agrees to do this operation. And Penman is sat for 24 minutes in a chair, restrained, while this thing is cut out of his face
Jesus
and dropped
Christ.
in a bucket. And
Did he survive?
Yeah, well, we have a picture of him later in life.
Oh, wow.
You know, and
He looks like he's going,
Yeah, he looks kind of like an ugly Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln wasn't really known for his looks.
I bet he's psyched that he doesn't have that thing on his face, though.
Yeah, I mean
I'll
you
take
could see that the jaw is definitely slimmer.
Yeah.
But he doesn't look too deformed considering what he went through. So it is incredible. You get such crazy stories. Like there's a woman who has a mastectomy in 1840 without any anesthetic. Now at this time, you would have, if you were wealthy or if you were middle class, you'd have this operation in your home. So you just have it on like your kitchen table.
Oh, Jesus.
Which would have been safer than going into the hospitals.
Really?
Yeah, because the hospitals were crawling with all kinds of infection. So hospitals were places for the poor. And to give you an idea of how gross it was, the bug catcher who would rid the beds of lice, he was paid more than the doctors and surgeons in this time. Yeah, because I mean, that's pretty important, right? There's maggots, all kinds of things crawling around in these hospitals. So if you were wealthy or middle class, you had your surgeon come to your home. And so she has a surgeon come, and the surgeon determines that, yes, the breast has to come off, and says, I'm going to return, but I'm not going to tell you the day, which would make me more anxious. He thought it was going to help her not focus on it, but all you would be thinking about, right, is when is this guy going to show up?
That's a person without breasts.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, I'll just show up. It'll be easy. And so he shows up, and he goes into her bedroom, and he opens his hand and shows her the knife he's going to use. And he says to prepare her soul for death. Like, this isn't very confidence-inspiring. Any doctors listening, don't tell your patients to prepare their soul for death. And she does survive, and she talks about how it's so vascular that the blood blinds him at one point. And so, like, just when you think it can't get worse, he can't see, and he's under She is under his hand for an hour and a half while he cuts away. And she survives. She ends up living a long and somewhat happy life. I'm sure she had a lot of nightmares. Yeah, there was the...
So do they tie this woman down? Like, how do they handle this?
They would have definitely had to restrain her. I mean,
so
people were probably a little bit stronger or more able to adapt to pain than we are, but nonetheless, there would have been some pretty heavy restraining.
What year was this?
That was in the 1840s.
Do we know when cancer became common, or was it always common in humans?
That's a good question. The oldest archaeological record, I believe, is 2,000 years old of metastatic cancer. So it's older than you think. They're diagnosing it for centuries and centuries. I'm not really an expert in history of cancer, but it is around. And so with breast cancer, probably by the time it got to the stage of mastectomy, it probably would have spread. If you think about it being visible to the naked eye.
But yet she survived.
She did survive, and so then you have to question whether she had breast cancer or maybe it was some kind of
cyst?
Maybe a cyst, and she went through that for that. Oh. But yeah, and again, before antiseptics, before Lister comes on and comes up with germ fighting techniques, this would have been so dangerous because you have this open cavity and wound. Yeah. And so Joseph Lister, when he comes up with his antiseptic techniques, he actually performs a mastectomy on his sister on his dining room table.
Oh, Christ!
and she survives, and that's in the book. See, this would be a great movie, don't you think?
Yeah, I do think it would be a great movie. It's like it would be a great movie for the Coen brothers.
Yeah.
Because it's so chaos filled.
I know, and all of that kind of grittiness. And,
they do good period pieces too.
Yeah.
Plus, they could make it more entertaining.
Let's make this happen, Joe.
I have no pull. I'm not a part of that world. But this guy with the face, where they cut that tumor out of his face. So for 24 minutes, that's all it took to cut that thing out of his face?
In that case, yeah. And remember, of course, it depended on the skill of your surgeon. Mm-hmm. So he goes to a very good surgeon named James Syme. But there's a story. So going back to penises, there's lithotomy is the removal of the stone, which you saw kind of a demonstration there. And it was incredibly painful. So they stuck a rod down the penis and they cut through the scrotum and they removed the stone. And of course, there was no pain medication and it was just awful.
Did they drink?
It's kind of a myth because, of course, drinking would thin your blood. But someone asked me, they said, I heard that surgeons would punch the patient out. And I was like, wow, you'd have to be really good to knock someone out on a first punch. And of course, you do more damage. You could do a lot of damage to the head. That's definitely didn't happen. Unless someone can prove me wrong. Maybe there's like a weird example, but I've never come across that. So it was you and the surgeon. And with the lithotomy, it takes a good surgeon, it took about 5 minutes. Well, there's a guy named Stephen Pollard in 1828 who goes in to have this done. Now, it's incredibly embarrassing. You're naked from the waist down. It's an embarrassing operation. It's painful. He's brought into the theater, and the surgeon ends up taking over an hour because he's so inept. And the patient is screaming, please just stop. And the surgeon yells back at him for having abnormal anatomy, which, how would you like that? You're sitting there on the table and you're being blamed for this going wrong. And he pulls through the operation, but he does die of postoperative infection.
Abnormal anatomy, how so?
He just said, you have abnormal anatomy. And so on the autopsy report, it was revealed that there was nothing abnormal about his anatomy. The surgeon just was really inept.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
So he was blaming the guy.
Did you have lunch before this?
Yeah, I did, but I'm all right.
Good. That's good because then you won't faint. Right?
Well, I hosted Fear Factor for 6 years.
That's true, yes.
I've seen everything.
Yeah.
Almost nothing makes me sick.
What's the worst? I mean, was there ever a segment on Fear Factor that you thought, ooh, I don't know if I can watch that?
No. When they had a drink cum, that was rough.
Oh.
Yeah. That was what got the show canceled.
Yeah.
But that was the second version of Fear Factor when it came back for a brief period of time, and they were going way too hard. They were trying to outdo themselves.
Further, yeah.
Yeah, they were like, Fear Factor's back, and it's crazier than ever, and they just went way over the top.
That's what they do with TV, right? Like, just always pushing the boundaries.
They didn't have to.
No.
They could have just gone with regular Fear Factor, and we would have all been fine.
We could do historical Fear Factor. We could recreate these sort of horrible things that people
It was a blessing
through.
in disguise. But this surgery as we know it, when did it first start? Like, what is the first historical recounting of an actual doctor
Or you mean someone saying they're a licensed doctor?
Well, when did it
calling them-
start? Like
asking really hard questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I know so little about history. It's like 19th, 18th century. We have evidence again in the archaeological records of surgical procedures going far back.
But who did them?
They would have been, sometimes they called them wise women, cunning women, barber surgeons.
Barber.
So one of the
part
barbers.
barber. I guess they were good at razors, right?
Yes, yeah. Actually, barber surgeons used to do things like pull your teeth. They used to bloodlet. And so the barber pole, which is red and white, is red and white because it was advertising their services as bloodletters. So what they would do is they would tie these bloody rags around the pole, and it would whip around the pole. I know, it's one of my favorite stories.
God.
And the ball at the top represented the bowl that would catch the blood, and the stick would have been the stick that you held to kind of get your veins to stick out. And people were bloodlet for all kinds of reasons. Like you would do it like a purge or a diet, or you would do it because you were ill. The idea being that you had produced too much blood and you needed the blood to be let to kind of restore balance in your body.
What do you think it would be like to go back in time and hear someone say something that stupid? Like, you're sick. We need to remove some of your blood. You have too much blood in your system, Lindsey.
You're going to send all these like crazy academic historians who are like, we can't. Yeah,
Barber
there you go. There's
surgeon,
you got the
tonsorial services. What does that mean?
And you know what else? The barbershop quartet comes from the idea that the barber surgeons often had a musical lute in the office that you would play or the patient would play. It was like a musical therapy. So there's all kinds of hangovers from it. And you know the demon barber, Sweeney Todd?
Yes.
So this is kind of one of these stories that pops up, and they think that it might be that medical practitioners were trying to undermine the legitimacy of the barbers.
Oh.
So you kind of either get this story that the barber is this like sort of demon figure who's chopping you up and selling you and making you into pies, or...
Is that a legit one? Because that seems like nonsense.
It seems like it's a recreation of an older one.
It seems like parody. Like, look, it says, listen to my troubles, no charge. Listen to your troubles, 50 cents.
They might have had that on their barber thing.
Yeah, when they're cutting bullets out of you, it says bullets removed, $2.
Maybe, I don't know. They're all drunk.
Pomade, mustache wax. I don't know.
People thought that bullets were... that gunpowder was poisonous. So a surgeon would often amputate if you were shot.
Oh, God.
Until they kind of realized that sometimes it was okay to just keep the bullet in, depending on where it was. But
it could just be like a recreation of something that someone found, maybe, and they're selling that as a piece, maybe something like that.
Right, probably, yeah.
Yeah, and we get the red, blue, and white barber poles now. So what happened was the barber surgeons and the surgeons split off professionally at some point in history. And so the surgeons start to use blue and white poles and the barbers use red and white poles.
Whoa.
And I think now the red, white, and blue is like the patriotic red, white, and blue. But the traditional barber pole would have been red and white, and it would have signified that you could come in and get your bloodletting because those bloody rags would have been out there on the pole. Before they had the pole, they would advertise by putting just bowls of congealed blood in the window.
Oh, Christ.
And then in London, they decided, I think it was about the 14th century, they said no more of that. So the barbers started to throw the blood into the river, which was also equally gross. Yeah. So the barber surgeons would have definitely been doing minor surgical procedures, and they would have been more affordable than the surgeons and the physicians themselves. But nobody could really do much for you in that period, according to our own sort of 21st century understanding. But I always say, to go back to your question about, how would it feel to hear something so dumb? Well, what do you think today that, in 100 years we're going to look back at? And there's definitely going to be stuff, right, that we're going to look back and go, I can't believe that, we used to do that. In fact, I think that this is probably going to get people to go, no, that totally works. You know that trend of cupping?
Yes.
Now that you see, so that was also 17th century. So they would have these heated cups, and they would create this blister, and then they would cut it open with this really sharp instrument, and that's how they would bleed you. So it's kind of this weird thing that's coming back, but for slightly different reasons.
I don't think there's any evidence that cupping is real.
No, I don't think so either. And I like to point people to the past, because if we're going to make fun of what they were doing in the past, it's kind of making a reappearance, so to speak. But people do all kinds of weird things now too. Like they eat the placenta.
Yeah.
there's no medical evidence that has any kind of health benefit.
Yeah, but it's edible. I think that's
it's
why
edible.
you can eat it.
Well, it's funny because that actually segues into this lovely object, this half skull here. My friend Zane Wiley creates these. These are actually cereal bowls.
Great.
But and the reason why I brought it was because it opens up a conversation about something that I like to talk about, which is corpse medicine. So people used to actually eat dead bodies for medicinal purposes.
What parts?
So if you had epilepsy in the early modern period, so we're like talking like 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, people would drink the blood of an executed criminal. So someone who lost their head. Like the idea was that the life cut short, that the blood was very powerful force. And so you get these sort of drawings of people gathered at the scaffold. You know, this poor bastard's going to lose his head. And these people are like holding cups up to catch the blood. And it didn't work. And epilepsy was so awful because it was so misunderstood. And you can imagine, you know, when someone goes into a seizure, it's scary. And if you don't understand what's happening, you could think that it's witchcraft or there's all kinds of things that people thought about that disease. So these people were quite desperate. So they were drinking the blood of executed criminals.
Good Lord.
They ground up mummies, ancient mummies, and they would make it into pills and did all kinds of things, right? So I always point this out. We eat the placenta today. It's kind of like, you know, a form of ingesting bodily see, there you go. You got the yes.
So people were just super, super desperate back then.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there was not much that could be done, right? But we do some kind of form of corpse medicine and organ donation. So we're taking dead body parts. We're not eating them, but we're taking them into our body to cure ourselves.
Yeah, I have a cadaver graft on my right knee.
Oh yeah, I have one in my jaw.
Really?
Yeah,
your jaw? What happened?
I got in a huge fist fight, and I had some gum disease up here, and then they had to like graft a little like piece of cadaver bone.
Whoa!
But they don't call it cadaver bone. Did they call it cadaver bone to you? Don't they call it freeze dry bone or something?
No, it wasn't bone. It was they called it an allograft. But it's a cadaver. They use the Achilles tendon for the ACL because the Achilles tendon is much larger than an ACL, so it's stronger. And are you familiar with the way it works? It's really kind of interesting.
No.
The way it works is not like it takes over. It's not like an organ transplant, so you don't have to worry about your body rejecting it in the same way. Although sometimes people's bodies don't accept it or it doesn't work, but they take this graft. They put this new tendon in place, this new ligament in place, rather, and then your body reproliferates that ligament with cells. So it's even though it'll feel like it's healed up within like a month or two, like your knee will feel a little bit weak from the surgery, but people get a distorted perception of how strong it actually is. And fighters, in particular, I know several fighters who have wound up re-injuring their knee because they thought it was okay. Really, it was very gummy and very weak.
So how long does it take to heal before you can
6 months.
Yeah. So it's
like 6 to 9 months they recommend.
But it's amazing what we can do now. I mean, when you think about 150 years ago that I'm talking about and today.
Yeah.
It's just and I always, because I'm a big Joseph Lister fan, I always say that if we hadn't understood germs, there would be no way to go deep into the body, would there?
Sure, yeah.
And so he opens up this sort of huge field with medicine, and a lot of advancements are made off the back of it. But it was a gritty time, and it definitely you definitely could die very easily. Life was very cheap back then.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine just the idea of that woman getting her breast removed on her kitchen table.
Yeah, there was there was a little boy. He was 12 years old. His name was Henry Pace, and he was told by the surgeon he had to have his leg removed. And he said, as little kids do, would it hurt? And the surgeon said no more than having a tooth pulled.
Oh, God.
So he was very unprepared. So they brought him into the operating theater, and he was so awake and so aware, he remembers counting 6 strokes of the saw before his little leg fell off.
Why did they have to cut his leg off?
He broke it. And
Jesus
if you had it was just a sprain and they just decided to take it off. No, I mean, if there was a compound fracture, the chances of it becoming infected was quite high. So when Lister comes along and he's trying to figure out what's causing infection, he notices that if it's a clean break and there's no break in the skin, usually it heals okay. But if there's a break in the skin, it gets infected and usually it leads to some kind of gangrene or septicemia. And that's how he starts to wonder, it must be something coming from outside and getting into this wound that is causing the infection. But he reads Louis Pasteur's germ theory, and this is how he starts to put it together. But when he first comes out with it, there's a lot of pushback because medicine and science are essentially conservative in the sense that it's like puzzle solving. If someone, you solve the puzzle within the rules that are already set out. If someone comes from sort of the fringe and has this wild idea, usually there's a lot of pushback. And so that's exactly what happens with Lister. And it's hard for us to imagine because germs, we understand them today, it seems obvious to us. But back then, a surgeon didn't wash his hands or his instruments because why would he wash his hands or his instruments if they were going to get dirty with the next patient? So you have to get into the logical mind of a Victorian surgeon. They wore aprons. I think, Jamie, I'd also sent a picture of like a surgeon with his apron on. Actually, it's a picture of a butcher, but it gives you that kind of idea of what your friendly Victorian surgeon would have been wearing. And that apron, the more blood it had on it, it was like a sign of pride almost, because that meant that your surgeon was very experienced and had a lot of blood on it.
That's a butcher, though, not
that
a surgeon.
Is a butcher.
But
yeah.
similar tools of the trade.
Yep, similar tools, and certainly that apron would have been on your surgeon.
I don't know about the hat.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like Gangs of New York,
Exactly.
You kind of picture they would have worn those really tall top hats and those crazy plaid colors, and it's a very colorful time before Victoria, of course, plunges the nation into mourning later. So Lister's coming in along the 1840s. So it's very sort of colorful and filthy and dirty.
Victoria plunged the nation into mourning? What do you mean by that?
When her husband died, she went into sort of lifetime mourning. So she's always wearing black for the rest of her life. And everybody follows her example. So we think of the Victorians wearing sort of all that black. But in Gangs of New York, a lot of people thought that was sort of an imagined world. But actually, that's what they would have looked like. They would have been wearing those plaids and those bright colors and those top hats. But Lister was a Quaker. We think of like Quaker oats, which is kind of accurate. And he would have been wearing sort of black and white and very dull colors. So when I think about this movie, because I think about it a lot, I think about sort of this world being very hedonistic and colorful, and there's a lot of drugs going on. They're discovering ether and all kinds of things that they're experimenting with. And then you have this somber Quaker. And as the movie sort of progresses, the world catches up and gets a bit cleaner with Lister.
So they were experimenting with all these drugs on themselves?
Oh yeah, it was like it was just a crazy time. So my book begins with the first operation under anesthesia. And I wanted to start there because I think if anybody has ever thought about the history of surgery, which they might not have until they turned into this podcast, they tend to think of that moment. That's the big moment. But actually surgery becomes much more dangerous because the surgeon still doesn't understand germs, but he doesn't have the patient fighting him anymore. So he's more willing to pick up the knife and go deeper in the body, and so postoperative infection rises. And it opens with the great Robert Liston, and he performs the first operation under ether in 1846 in London. And he doesn't think it's going to work. It comes from America. He calls it the Yankee Dodge. And it's a miracle. It works, and the age of agony is over. When ether was discovered, everybody wanted to try it. This drug that made you insensible, what was that like? And so you get these kinds of stories of medical students sniffing it and drinking it. In fact, I believe there's still a place in London you can get an ether cocktail.
What?
Again, I don't endorse it. It's highly flammable. So people also smoked a lot in operating theaters. So you can imagine that there were a lot
Oh, Christ.
Yeah, there were a lot of accidents. But you drop it basically, because it evaporates really quickly, you drop it on a strawberry and then you dunk it into champagne. And it's supposed to get you really high very quickly, and then it wears off equally quickly. I tried to convince my publisher to have ether cocktails at the book launch, but they were like,
Just have a bunch of Ubers ready.
Yeah,
Stand by.
yeah, exactly. Or carriages, like in the Victorian So people were, definitely trying. And then, of course,
Have you tried it?
I've not tried it. I haven't found that bar yet.
But yet you
there's
were willing
rumor.
to experiment on the people that came to your book launch.
Hell yeah, why not? That'd be the best thing. Great story, you know.
I would feel like you
instead of
should
people
probably dip your toe in first.
Yeah, maybe try it out.
Yeah.
Maybe for the next book.
Yeah.
And so you have ether in sort of the mid 19th century, and then of course later you have cocaine, you have opium, which is actually cocaine comes along and is presented as sort of a cure to the opiate, the morphine addiction. So like take cocaine instead. And I had brought, it's in my Mary Poppins bag. I'll show it to you later after the show. I brought a postcard that shows a dentist and he's pulling a tooth, and the person wrote underneath, just had a tooth pulled with cocaine. So they were using it for all kinds of things, and doctors were becoming addicted themselves to these drugs. Then heroin comes along. Bayer invents heroin. Heroin is given to your children. It's put in all kinds of things. Again, it's positioned as, break your cocaine addiction now with heroin. So it was just a crazy period, and it was really sort of in the early 20th century when a lot of this stuff started to be regulated finally.
Wow.
I didn't bring any of that with me.
I believe there was a mummy that was found in ancient Egypt that tested positive for cocaine.
Oh.
But they think that it might be a false positive because apparently there's something else that they would consume back then that would make you test positive for cocaine.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, Jamie will find it. But it was some evidence. I think what they were trying to connect this to, now I remember, they were trying to connect this to the idea that people from Egypt had the ability to travel to the Americas. And that someone from, here it goes, American drugs and ancient Egyptian mummies. Can you make that a little larger, please? It says, it seems safe to say that blah, 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 blah. In 1992, a new study of 9 mummies from ancient Egypt created quite a stir when it was announced the discovery of traces of nicotine and cocaine in their hair. Both of these chemicals came from plants found only in South America, and this research has since been touted as evidence of pre-Columbian contact between America and Africa, something thought to be impossible based on the rest of the archaeological record. So what's going on? Let's start by looking at the evidence. 1992, they're performed by Svelta Balabanova and that's a serious woman, and 2 of her colleagues at the Institute for Anthropology, and this is in Munich. They're using German words for
I would skip
anthropology
that.
and probably in humanities of the university in Munich. The tests were carried out by 9 mummies on 9 mummies at the Munich Museum, dating from 1070 to 395 BC. The study focused on hair samples, which were often used to assess drug concentrations in the body. The results, what does it say here? What they discovered, all the mummies tested positive for cocaine and hashish, which makes sense. The results caused an immediate stir. Come on, let's cut to the chase here, folks. First thing to say, archaeologists are not just being stubborn about this. There are many reasons not to think the traces of drugs in 9 mummies means. What is it? What is the conclusion? Cut to the chase, you fucks.
This is a real academic article here.
Yeah, nicotine, cocaine. Okay, back up. Cocaine, stop. Okay, cocaine, most of us think of today, was first discovered in early civilizations. The Andean region of South America, they chew in the coca leaves, exactly. Instead, the cocaine and possibly the nicotine, too, were actually being introduced to the mummies as part of an embalming process. Huh.
Oh, that's interesting.
Whoa. More likely they obtained cocaine from America. Okay. I don't know. I give up. There's no way. We'll have to read this.
You did a good, yeah.
I tried.
Yeah, you tried.
This seems like it's going to take a long time. Many resins and spices, hold on a second, were certainly used this day. We aren't entirely sure what they all were. Rare or exotic materials were almost certainly used. And it is far less of a stretch to suggest this included imports from the Middle East and potentially as far afield as India. I don't know. I think they're very skeptical about the idea that people from Egypt were able to travel all the way to the Americas where cocaine was, but I think part of the conclusion was that there were some other things that would make that you test positive for cocaine.
Oh, it's interesting.
It was sort of like poppy seeds make you test positive for heroin.
Right, yeah.
Like if you have to go for a drug test for work, they say don't eat poppy seed
Don't
bagels.
eat that Yeah, wasn't there like a Seinfeld episode?
I'm looking at the Wikipedia for it too. It might have been part of a thriving tourist scam in Egypt in the Victorian era. So they might have said it was there, and some people would come look, and then,
Wait a minute. Said what was there?
The cocaine. It says, since passing his corpses off the recently deceased as ancient mummies was a thriving tourist scam in Egypt during the Victorian era. Like it could have... that
doesn't make sense because the tests were done in 1992.
After the experiments, even assuming the cocaine was actually found on the mummies, it's possible this could have been a contamination that occurred after
With
the
the-
discovery or whatever. something
Yeah.
like that.
Okay. So a
Okay.
bunch of cokeheads were fondling mummies.
Yeah.
Well, they wanted those mummies because they wanted to eat them, as I said. You know,
Oh,
they
yeah.
ground them up and
They'd use
they
that
did all
in
kinds of
ancient
things.
Egyptian mummies. They used
Yeah,
that too.
yeah. Think about how much was destroyed because people had to eat
Well,
it.
I think about it all the time. There's a fantastic exhibit.
Cure-all mummy.
Oh, cure-all mummy powder. Wow, look at that. That is nuts. Mummy extract. It's cure-all. Whatever you got.
Yeah,
Fix
that's, it. You know, it's a quack remedy when it's a cure-all. We still have quack remedies. You know, take a pill, lose a lot of
Right.
weight.
Well,
It's
those
like modern
late
day
night
quack.
things that are causing people to lose weight, those late night infomercials.
Yep.
Take a bunch of pills.
Yeah, that's our modern day quackery.
There's a fantastic exhibit that's right now. There's an IMAX exhibit in Los Angeles at one of the museums. I saw it about a year ago. But they have a King Tut exhibit, and then on top of that, they have this gigantic IMAX theater, which is fantastic. And they show like all these different tombs that they had discovered and how they discovered them. But it makes you really, when they've discovered King Tut's tomb, we have no idea how many similar tombs there were that were looted over the, many,
think about
many
how much
hundreds
was
and
lost.
thousands of years. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we have, in the museums is just sort of a fraction of what we know, and still stuff is coming to light. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Victorians are responsible for destroying a lot, for taking those mummies and just grounding them up
So
and all kinds of
strange.
things. Yeah.
But it's what gets me is what was the motive? Like, where was the theory? Like, where did the theory come from? Like, when you want to take a
Some of it
mummy and
would have
make it
been-
into powder.
Some of it would have been sort of folk medicine influence. There's this idea of sympathetic magic. So, for instance, if I stabbed you with a sword, this gets very violent. You could be healed if I put this sort of special sympathetic powder on the sword. It would heal you. So it was sort of this healing by distance. So all kinds of strange ideas existed. And that's why it's important when you're studying the history of medicine to really get into the mindset, because it's so wildly different to the way we think.
Right.
Actually, do you know what this is that I brought? This, if people are just listening, it's a long beaked mask. I don't
Like
know
a
if I'm
bird
holding
mask.
This up. Yeah.
I do not know what that is.
Okay, so a lot of people think this is a Venetian mask. This is actually particularly a particular example from Venice. It is what doctors would have worn during the bubonic plague. So it's called the plague doctor mask. And so it was invented in the 17th century by a French doctor. And the idea behind it was, so people thought that disease was spread by this thing called miasma, which are like little particles in the air. They're sort of associated with bad smells. So if something smells bad, it's probably not good for you, is what they thought. And it kind of makes sense, because if you're in a really, if you're in a slummy area of the Victorian period, it probably has a lot of disease. It probably doesn't smell good. So that was sort of the thinking behind it. So what you would do is you would put sweet smelling herbs into the beak. And so you would be smelling this in. It would protect you from those evil miasma.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Is that a real one?
No, we don't actually have, I don't believe there's an example of a real one from the 17th century, but there's a lot of illustrations of the plague doctor. And he would have been wearing a hat, he would have been wearing a cape, leather gloves, like sort of just protecting himself. Oh, there you go.
That's a real one? Authentic 16th century plague doctor mask preserved and on display at the, there you go, another one. Deutschen German Museum of Medical History.
But I question that because it was invented in the 17th century. So if it's real, it's going to be a little bit later.
Interesting.
But we don't know how much they were worn because they would have been expensive. A lot of doctors weren't very noble. So if the plague broke out, they got the hell out of there. There was sort of a phrase, go far and go long, get out and don't come back for a while. God. There wasn't much they could do for you. They had a stick as well that they would sort of poke the patient with, so they wouldn't have to touch the patient and kind of have them turn over, and they can, yes, you have the plague. There wasn't much they could do for you. We can cure the plague.
Again, they did not know what what germs were. So they really didn't understand what the plague was.
They had sort of a concept of contagion. So if you broke out with the plague, they would probably quarantine you in your house. And they put a big cross on the door. And so people would bring food, and you'd put a basket outside of your window with a rope, and you take. And so they do that until everybody was dead in the house, or that the plague had passed, and they felt that you were safe to come out into the general population. So there was an idea that these things were contagious, but not, again, in the way that we kind of understand diseases being spread today.
God, it's so strange that they would. You would not know what was going on. Like, people would just start dying, and you'd be like, "What is this?
You would
a
think
curse?"
that it was, it could be God's curse. And people say, the plague mask is so terrifying.
It is pretty creepy. Can I put it on?
It's super creepy, but I always say that it's good luck. This is why I brought this across the Atlantic, so Joe Rogan could wear the plague doctor mask.
Yeah, how many people would know what that is? Like, if you went,
if you go to Venice,
party?
they say plague doctor mask.
Really?
It's funny because I was just in Venice recently, and they were saying that the big carnival that they have every year, it's becoming harder to do because of security reasons. So you have like a huge population of a city wearing masks and covering their identities.
Oh.
So they have to cut back, which kind of sucks because that's like the fun of the carnival. So now they're cutting back where you can wear them in public places and things like that. But
what a weird world we live in.
Yeah, it is unfortunate.
Can't even wear a plague mask.
Can't wear a plague mask. I'm going to bring it back, though. I'm just going to be walking around in downtown LA with
How would that attach to your face? Was it like straps or something?
Yeah, there would have been straps, or in that other example he was showing, it looked like it was sort of a full-on...
Oh, there it goes. I mean, that looks so creepy.
It's so creepy, but...
Death.
Today, we have the modern plague doctor. What do you think that would be?
Yeah, the
hazmat. Yeah, exactly. And so you think about the hazmat going into hot zones. That would be pretty scary if you didn't know what was going on. And certainly sort of ominous, when you see the hazmat. So it's a weird thing that exists because in a strange kind of way, it probably did protect the plague doctor because he was covering himself up, but it protected him for the wrong reasons. He still didn't understand how disease was spread.
Are you aware of the theory of alien abduction being a distant memory of childbirth?
No.
Yeah, there's a theory that is actually being tossed about that these people that have this they have this memory of childbirth, right? So all of a sudden you're being born, there's bright lights above you, there's a man or a woman who's the surgeon with a mask that covers their face, so all you see is their eyes.
Okay.
And everything looks bright and it's terrifying and clinical, and you're on this table and everything's cold. Most of these alien abduction experiences that people recount, they take place in some sort of a medical facility
setting. Yeah.
And everything is bright and strange and cold, and they think that what this is they're saying that we had this idea that children don't have memories, that babies don't have memories. And so they're saying, well, why wouldn't they have memories? That's ridiculous. Of course they have memories. They have brains. They grab your finger, they look you in the eye. They would have a memory of every second that they were born. And it's probably one of the most profound and disturbing memories because before that, everything is incredibly peaceful. You're inside the mother's womb.
Then you're just like taken out.
And then you're pulled out, and then there's this bright light above you. You never experience any light.
Yeah.
So and your visual perception, your field of view is all distorted, right? This is the first time you're using your eyes. That's why people have the same...
So it's like tapping into this memory, this early memory. That's interesting.
This is a theory. It makes sense to me because if you think about...
Makes more sense than the abduction.
Well, it does because people don't really go anywhere. See, the thing about the abduction thing is they put like cameras in people's rooms and they say they have these alien abduction experiences, but they don't go anywhere. So what they're doing is they're dreaming.
Yeah.
I mean, which is
the
normal.
mind is amazing and it's so powerful, and we know so little still.
Yeah. So also like all these. I mean, it's kind of duh because they all happen while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Like 90
and you're
plus
right,
percent.
They tend to be medical.
Yeah. It's very medical in nature, right? You're being examined. And then there's also, going back to childbirth, there's also a lot of people that have these experiences that they are being told that either they're taking their baby away from them, or they're studying their baby, or that they had a baby inside of them that they didn't know about, and that the aliens have put it there and they're taking it out.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it even goes back to the virgin birth, right? I mean, it's all very weird. But this memory that people have from childhood is most likely, probably a pretty intense, powerful memory that's always there.
Yeah, and
your
affecting
first memory.
Yeah, and some people can tap into it and some people can't.
Yeah,
clearly.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also a theory while natural childbirth is supposed to be less traumatic. Like women having natural childbirth in a bathtub, that is actually...
Well, we're kind of like moving back to, it's men start to get involved in childbirth around the 17th century, 18th century.
What happened before then?
It was mostly women. So women in the village would come. And actually the term gossip comes from the idea the women who would spread the word in the village that someone was going into labor, they were called the gossips. So they would spread the word.
Wow.
It became sort of a negative thing later. So the gossips would spread the word, the women would come in. This was a female-only chamber, and men were not really allowed in. A man might be brought in if the mother was dying or if the child was dying. And then in that case, instruments were brought into the birthing chamber. So the doctor might come in and he might take these sort of forceps and pick the baby apart and take the baby out. The baby would die.
God.
But in those cases, it was like really extreme. Like this was going to happen. Like either the mother was going to die, the baby was going to die. Both of them were going to die.
Or if the baby was coming out feet first.
Yeah. I mean, but a capable midwife could handle that. But this, the Cesarean section, people think that it comes from the term, the idea that Julius Caesar was ripped from the womb of his mother.
Right.
But it's unlikely that story is true because his mother lives into old age. So probably the term Cesarean comes from the Latin term meaning to cut. And the first sort of record we have of this happening, I think, is in the 16th century, and it's a farmer, and he takes the instruments that he uses to castrate his pigs to cut this baby out of his wife.
Jesus Christ.
And we don't have any records of whether this probably didn't work. Again, no idea of germs, all this kind of stuff.
We don't know if she lived.
I don't have. There's no sort of. It doesn't follow. The records don't follow the story. But she probably died, and the baby probably died as well.
And for people who don't know, they castrate pigs to make them more edible. They oftentimes castrate them and then let them loose because then they concentrate on grass and not ass. That is an actual farmer's term.
I have talking about cesarean sections and castrating pigs. Who knew those two things would?
Well, that's what they do with
the joy
steers
of this podcast
as well. The
Okay.
difference between a steer and a bull is a steer is castrated.
Oh, that's
they
interesting.
castrate them because they make better steaks.
Oh, things I learn on this.
Yeah, you don't want a muscular, jacked bull.
No, probably not.
eat
Be
his
very
steak.
chewy.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You want,
that buffalo above my friend Adam Greentree shot that in Australia, and my friend Cam was chewing on a piece of his for one piece for half an hour.
Oh my gosh, it was that muscular and
I mean,
I guess that makes sense.
2,000-pound sack of steel.
So it was not good.
No,
not the thing you want to sit down and have a meal.
No, I mean they say they vary. Like sometimes some of them you can eat.
Yeah.
I mean you can eat them. It's all buffalo meat.
Yeah.
But they're just insanely dense.
It's crazy how big. I mean, when you see the skull, it's just. The size of it is incredible.
Yeah, it's also an invasive species, so they have no natural predators. So there's just thousands and thousands of them destroying the countryside. And people travel up to the northern lands. Ardaland? I forget the name of the place where they go and they hunt these things.
Wow.
Yeah, they're huge.
Yeah, they are.
Australia's a trip. I mean, it is really a wildlife experiment because they brought in so many animals, and New Zealand as well.
Yeah, and they're not indigenous, and they're just doing a lot of damage. Yeah.
So when you think about the history of surgery, and you concentrate on this one very particular time.
In this book, yes.
In this book.
Yeah.
But as a medical historian, like first of all, what led you to that? Like why you seem so
it's
normal.
It's a real thing. Oh yeah, I'm super normal. Look at all these skulls and stuff in front of me. I'm like that kid who never grew out of the obsession with Tales from the Crypt and
me too.
Ripley's Believe It or Not, the shrunken heads.
Yeah.
I actually did a segment for a documentary on the shrunken heads, and I had to go out to Poland, and I actually got to hold these things that I was always fascinated with growing up.
Well, people don't know that they think the skull's in there. That's why they don't
Yes,
understand.
that's
Like, how do you
right.
shrink your head?
Yeah, and it's amazing because what they do is they obviously they take the skull out and it's a process. And this documentary was looking at, they were DNA testing them because the tribe that makes these skulls, they were done for a specific purpose to trap the soul of the warrior that they killed, so that there was a spiritual reason behind it. But what they were finding was that some of these shrunken heads were female, which probably means that as Westerners came into these areas, they wanted to collect these shrunken heads as curiosities, of course. And so they traded guns for heads. And so it kind of drove up the demand for these shrunken heads.
So they started killing women.
Well, it wasn't just anybody. And it might not have been killing them. It might have just been taking bodies of people who had already died.
Right.
But they definitely aren't all authentic in the sense that they were
Killed in battle.
Yeah, killed in battle. And so it's just kind of an interesting, but I got to interact and see these shrunken heads. So I was that weird, creepy kid that, no one really wanted to talk to. I joke that I also looked like Barb from Stranger Things for a long time. And my brother pointed this out, and we were watching Stranger Things, and then Barb dies and nobody gives a shit. And
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry, everybody. And I was just devastated. I'm like, nobody noticed for, like a whole season. But
yeah, they barely cared. They're like, well, she's
barely
missing.
cared.
Yeah, I guess she's missing.
No one cared about Barb.
Last time we saw her by the pool.
I was really awkward. I was 5'7" by the age of 10, and I was just like that weird kid with Tales from the Crypt. And so I went on to study history in college, and then I went to Oxford and I did a master's and PhD in it. But academia doesn't allow me to be as creative and weird as I'd like to be. So now I'm just a storyteller. I'm a freelance writer, and I do this YouTube channel, and I'm sure Oxford's going to be like, give us the PhD back at some point.
Can they do that?
No.
Well, there's a real value in that in terms of education, because what you do is very interesting and entertaining. I mean, that's why I started following you and retweeting your stuff. It's really...
No, I appreciate that. It's funny because there is this sort of tension between what they call popular history and academic history. And I will get, academic historians will come at me on Twitter and stuff. And this one guy said to me, well, you're just an entertainer. And I was like, well, that's not an insult to me. Why is that an insult?
Well, that's not true. You have a PhD.
Yeah.
Hey, stupid.
Yeah.
I went to school.
I should have just said that,
Yeah. What does that mean? You're just an entertainer.
Yeah. It's like I'm bastardizing the subject in some kind of, way that they don't like.
Well, it's because of people like me. But I'm like, ew, gross. And then I retweet it.
I know, exactly. And then
it makes it. I mean,
and then they want it. I did this thread on Twitter called "Your Victorian Doctor's Trying to Kill You," and every tweet was like cocarettes, cocaine-laced cigarettes, which you had also shared at one point, and just all the kinds of crazy things. And then at the end of the thread, I said, "But what is it about today that people will look back?" But this one academic was like, "This is really, bad history, and you're making it fun. How dare you?" It's like that kind of offense of that. But for the most part, people enjoy it, and that's nice.
Well, that is like the big complaint that people have about academia, is that it's so stuffy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I'm going to get so many weird academic trolls. I know. It's one of those things I've had to make peace with because I am a storyteller. And if you look at my profile, I call myself a storyteller first rather than historian.
Well, they're great stories, though.
They're great stories.
For us in 2019, we're so incredibly fortunate to have, actual real doctors with real modern medicine to fix us. And, talking to a guy who's had probably 5 surgeries.
Yeah.
It's so...
I know. I had an appendectomy, and it was amazing. They use little tiny robotic instruments now, and they barely make, I think the incision's an inch long or something. It's just incredible.
A buddy of mine had shoulder surgery, and the actual cuts are like millimeters, tiny little cuts. You barely can see the scars.
It's
fix his shoulder.
Amazing. And, with your knee surgery, it was an injury from activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you think about people in the past, they weren't necessarily, well, I mean, there were sports and competitions, but mostly people were getting injuries from repetitive, strenuous labor that they were doing.
Sure.
There's a story of a cab driver in the 18th century, and he got this aneurysm behind his knee. So the cab drivers in the 18th century wore these high boots, like riding boots, and it would rub at the back of the knee, and it created this huge aneurysm. And there was a surgeon named John Hunter in London who said, well, normally what you do is you would hack the leg off because if it pops, right?
God.
If it pops, you're going to bleed out. But he said, I have an idea. I want to cut into the leg and I want to tie off the blood supply to the aneurysm. I want to see if that works. And it did. And he saved this guy's leg. And that's really important because remember, these people had no options if they couldn't work. A lot of these people did.
When you say aneurysm, like people think of aneurysm, they think of a brain.
Right. It's like a what's the term? It's a specific kind of aneurysm. It's almost like a balloon that appears on the outside, sort of on the outside. So it's just a big sack of blood. Big sack of blood.
Why didn't they think they could just drain it? That's what I would think.
I
like
think
a hematoma.
If you severed it, yeah, I don't know.
I'd be like, slow down, doc.
Yeah, don't hack that leg off.
I gotta drive this taxi, bitch.
Yeah, and if he had lost his leg, it would have been. And what's incredible about that story actually is that that Hunter saves the leg, and then when the man dies, right before he dies, he knows he's going to die. This is many years later. He writes a letter and he wills his body to Hunter. So this is one of the first early examples to take the leg and to open it up and dissect it and to see what happened. And so that leg is on display at the surgeons, at the Royal College of Surgeons in London.
So they embalmed it?
Yeah, well, he would have preserved it probably with wax injections, almost like plastination.
Oh, like they did
an
with that
form.
Body. What is that body
weird
exhibit?
Guy, Body Worlds.
Yeah, what do you think about
Gunther
that?
Van.
I was very torn when I was walking around this because what a part of me was saying, this is really fascinating. And the other part of me was saying, what is the difference between this and like fucking Ed Gein's house where he made lampshades out of people?
Well, yeah, I mean, one would hope the difference is consent. But
one would hope, though.
Yeah, one would hope. Well, there has been controversies with certain exhibitions, maybe not Body Worlds, but there's been some spin-offs where there's been a question of where they got those bodies.
Yes.
And of course, if you're also going into sort of poor areas and asking people to hand over their bodies, is it really consent? Because sometimes these families don't have money for funerals. And so there's other incentives. But I think my view is, it's given under the guise of science that we can only view dead bodies through the lens of science today. That's the only acceptable way. But it really is art. And I wish that it would just be more openly recognized as just art, whether it's your kind of thing or not, because some of it is posed in really shocking ways that are unnecessary to teach anatomy.
Right.
So if you're going to say it's an anatomical lesson, why does the person have to be posed in this sort of dramatic way? So I think that, it would be better if we just called it for what it was. It's art, and it's supposed to be provocative and shocking. And that's why people come to see it. And we're morbidly curious.
It is absolutely interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and people say, oh my gosh, the Victorians bought tickets to the operating theater. Well, people come to my Instagram account, I mean, we're still morbidly curious.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's really interesting that it's called a theater as well. Did you ever see that movie with Benicio del Toro? I think it was just The Wolfman. It was one of the more recent werewolf movies, but he becomes a werewolf in the operating theater.
Oh,
so the doctor is convinced. Okay. The doctor's convinced that he's a madman. There's something wrong with him, so they give him electric shock therapy and all these different things.
And what's the period that it's
supposed to be in this period?
Oh, in the 19th century. Okay.
Yeah. It's in London.
So, interesting.
Yeah, see if you can find it. It's kind of a crazy scene.
The doctors were experimenting with electricity a lot and galvanism and things like kind of reanimating the corpses, which is where we get the story Frankenstein. And they were also interested in how long do you live or your conscience after you're beheaded.
Right.
So there's these experiments during the French Revolution where they're like shouting at the heads to see if the heads will blink.
Oh, God. So I'm sure we can't air this on YouTube. So this will only be us watching this, because if we air it on YouTube, they'll do a...
See, that's exactly what the theaters look like.
Yeah, he's
that's
like saying that he's going to kill all of them. Like, you need to get out of here. And this doctor is very arrogant, and they're dealing with him, and the moon turns full, and he starts freaking out. And it's really interesting, because if this was actually how they had patients strapped in, is that accurate? Like the way that chair is set up?
Yeah, they would have. So his feet, it looked like his feet were on the ground. So the chair would have been higher, so his feet would have sort of dangled.
It's one of the best ever. And I'm a giant werewolf fan. This is one of the best ever, because this was actually done by Rick Baker, who's the same guy who did An American Werewolf in London, which is the werewolf that's out in the hall.
Okay. Oh yeah, I took pictures of that. Yeah, I met earlier.
But this is the modern version of it that they decided to make. And the thing is that these guys are watching this, and the doctor is arrogant. He has his back to the patient while he's discussing.
And that's exactly what those theaters would have looked like as well.
Yeah.
But they would have been just so crowded.
That is so strange, though, that this was entertainment. This was something that people wanted to see.
Well, it wasn't just sort of the morbid curiosity. It was also that the Victorians were obsessed with scientific progress. So they wanted to come in and see.
Right.
I see that.
They want to see what the latest was.
They're all getting the hell out of there now in this clip. For people who are listening.
Yeah, it's not a good movie, but it's a great scene. There's a bunch of great scenes in this movie. I enjoy it just because I love werewolf movies.
Yeah. It would have been fun to shoot.
Yeah. Well, it's also, they decided in this movie to make it with a minimal use of CGI. What they decided to do was do it all with actual rubber masks and things like that. Yeah. Pretty ridiculous movie, honestly.
It's funny because it sort of reminds me of again, Liston, the 6'2" giant. He got a patient on the table who had to have a bladder stone removed. Remember how awful that was. And this guy was like, fuck it, I'm not going to do it. He jumps off the table. He runs across the room, locks himself in a closet. And Liston, all 6'2" of them, chases this guy, rips the door off, and just drags him back.
Oh, my God.
So, and that really happened. Again, be a great movie. Anybody listening?
Yeah, you're really pushing this movie hard. Are you trying to sell that while you're out here?
No, I mean, I
guarantee you someone is listening that can make that happen.
Listen, I could sell the rights to the book, but I've held on to them, and I'm developing them with my producing partner because this book was born out of a lot of trauma. So a couple years ago, I went through a really bad divorce, and I was facing deportation as a result from the UK. And so I had no money. They took my passport, everything. Like, I couldn't do anything. So I wrote this book. And so I always say that Joseph Lister saved a lot of lives, not least my own, because it's kind of lifted me and it's been a rebirth.
Oh, wow.
So I really want to be involved in the process. I've always been fascinated with movies. I want to kind of see how the sausage is made, so to speak. If you're a writer and you just sell off the rights, you don't really have much creative input at all.
Right.
But yeah, I just think that it's a great story because it sort of crosses with people who are interested in the horror genre, right? Because you get the surgery, the Victorian surgery, but it's an uplifting story about something that changed the world in the way we fundamentally understand it.
Who do you envision playing Lister? I see Bradley Cooper.
Oh.
What do you think? Like it?
There you go. Jamie's like, whatever.
He's perfect movie star.
Quickly trying to think of someone else, but yeah,
he could basically do every movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
He's like a quintessential movie star, right?
He is. Yeah, I was thinking Eddie Redmayne, the British actor, who's like, he's so sweet, and Lister's a very sort of
Who's that
likable.
guy?
He's in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the Harry Potter. He's really big in Britain, or Benedict Cumberbatch.
But that guy's awesome.
Yeah, Benedict
Doctor Strange.
I think Benedict Cumberbatch would like to play Liston, the 6'2" guy, because it's a real theatrical role.
Well, Cumberbatch he's another guy who's awesome and everything.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, Benedict.
Yeah, he's killer in Doctor Strange is another movie that's not the best movie in the world, but he's killer in it.
Yeah, and he's tall. He could play Liston. We could bulk him out a bit, and there we go.
Does he have to get bulked out?
Would you like a role in this?
No, I'm not.
Maybe the patient.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
The guy who jumps off.
Bladderstone guy.
Yeah, I'll be the guy who gets his dick hammered with a nail. No, thank you.
You don't want to be the guy that dies when his coat is slashed.
Yikes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll be that guy.
Yeah.
I'll be the guy who faints. Oh, good heavens. And just fall down and passes out from fright.
Yeah, that's a good role.
Yeah. So this book, sort of, you were in quite a bit of personal anguish yourself when you created this book. So you have this deep attachment to it. I can completely understand that.
It's my first book, and I'm working on a new book on the history of plastic surgery.
And I'm fascinated with that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm looking at a guy named Harold Gillies who was rebuilding soldiers' faces during World War I. And if you've ever seen these guys' photos, I mean, we have no problems. You think we have no problems in the 21st century when you look at these guys because they've been shot through the face and their jaws are missing. And Harold Gillies really designs or starts plastic surgery as we know it. And it was a time when losing a limb made you a hero, but losing your face made you a monster. So these guys are really isolated. And so what Gillies does is he gives them their identity back. So it starts on the battlefields of World War I, and it's going to kind of follow Gillies throughout. I like to do character-driven stories. Even though they're 100% true, I like to sort of follow medical history through the eyes of one particular person.
Wow. Yeah, the history of plastic surgery is fascinating to me, and I'm hooked on that show, Botched.
Oh, yeah. People always mention that.
That show is so crazy. This is me watching Botched. This is me all the time. Like, Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ. What are you doing, man? Stop doing that.
And what people put themselves through, right?
Oh.
I started following some plastic surgeons on Instagram just to kind of know what they're doing today and thinking about the ethics of how they target people on social media and how do we feel about that. And I'm telling you, I'm 37. I'm feeling bad about my body. I can't imagine if you're like 14 and awkward and you're barb, and you have access to these accounts and the effect it has on young people on Instagram and everything.
Well, I had Jonathan Haidt on the podcast who wrote this book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and one of the big things that he discusses is people comparing themselves to others through social media and children, particularly girls.
Yeah.
There's higher instances of suicide, cutting, depression, much higher instances of depression.
I believe it.
Yeah, I believe it too.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And then you see someone like Kylie Jenner who transforms herself literally from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan.
Yeah.
And it's all done through the knife, and it's crazy.
And that's the whole thing. Like that kind of beauty is unattainable, really, sort of naturally.
These
oh yeah, this
this
is Harold Gillies, one of his patients, and
wow, that's the end.
Yeah, and what he did was he invented this thing called the tubed pedicle, where he would take skin and he basically create a tube, and he could place it somewhere on the face where the defect was, and the blood supply would make it attach. And
that guy did an incredible job on that guy's nose.
That's probably 1917 right there.
That's like better than a lot of the people on Botched. It really is. I'm not joking. Particularly the final product.
And that's Gillies down there. That's another.
Man, no, he was incredible.
And really, when you think about what these guys went through, too.
Yeah.
So my book is starting with this guy named Percy Clare, who's shot through both cheeks, and his face is just blowing off. And to get off the battlefield was half the struggle, because if your face is blown off, most of the time the stretcher bearers will just pass you up.
Oh, Jesus.
Because they think you're going to die. But it was a survivable wound. And so just getting off the battlefield, so you sit there for 12 hours. Maybe you die in the process.
And you have no food and you can't eat.
No food. And that was the other thing. So a lot of these guys died because well-intending nurses would lay them down. And if you don't have a jaw, your tongue slips back into your throat and you choke.
Yeah.
Or you suffocate. So just getting to Harold Gillies Hospital. So he starts this incredible facial and jaw unit in Britain during the war. Just to get there was a battle. And then you have to go through all these painful operations. And so I want to look at that. And then, of course, like, how does that become what we do today? But equally, I always tell people that Botched is one form of plastic surgery. But, of course, there's a lot of important surgeons doing reconstructive work.
Yes.
And now we have face transplants, which are incredible. I don't know, Jamie, if you can find someone who's had a face transplant. But
there's been quite a few.
There's I think the hardest part is finding the donor. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get people to donate their organs as it is, but think about a face is so personal.
Yeah.
And the last one, National Geographic did a spread on it. It was I think it was an 18-year-old girl who shot herself in the face. And in a moment of rage and anyway, she ended up having this face transplant about 3 years later. And the donor face, I think, was someone who was in their 30s. This person had died, I think, of an overdose, and then the family decided to give this face over. So it's actually incredible what we can do when you think about, from the battlefields of World War I to what Gillies doing to where we are today with facial reconstruction. And it's just going to get better and better.
Yeah, I'm sure it is going to get better and better. And for people with disfiguring injuries and things, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
What freaks me out about botched is the psychological aspect of people constantly tinkering with their looks. It's just
and now they have apps where you can upload your face and you can change things about your face, and it's just we're all becoming more and more insecure, I think, with social media. And it's part of this world where nothing is real.
And that's the other part of it, is a lot of these pictures aren't real.
No.
Like, people are doctoring their photos to make themselves look different than they actually do look. And then
I know.
people
Someone
see those,
walks into the studio and you're like, wait, that's not what I thought that person was going to look like.
This woman who's friends with my wife, her neighbor is a model, and she takes all of her photos with no makeup on, and then they put the makeup on her.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I didn't know they could do that.
Yeah, that's how they do it. They do it all through Photoshop. So
Wait, Jamie, can you do that for can you edit this video?
He can do whatever. He can turn you into an avatar lady. He can do anything. But it's kind of crazy that they take photos with no makeup, and then they add the blush and the eyeshadow and all that.
That's wild. Yeah. Nothing's real. Nothing's real anymore. We kind of just
I don't want to go down this road in this conversation, but I think we're preparing ourselves for a time where nothing is real. I mean, I think we're preparing ourselves for a time where we live inside some sort of a simulation.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because celebrities like yourself have to really think about how your image is used after you're gone as well now. Like, something that you didn't have to think about. So there was a commercial with Audrey Hepburn in Britain, and it's a Galaxy chocolate commercial, and she's there, and it looks like she's eating a chocolate bar. And so the ways that they can manipulate images. And I think for the first time, a lot of celebrities need to really think carefully about whether they're okay with their images being used in certain kinds of ways after their death, like who owns your image. It's just like when you look at medical history in the past, you don't own your body. And so a lot of these surgeons get hold of these bodies to dissect. And they're digging them up from graveyards. There were body snatchers. They called themselves resurrection men. And they would go into these cemeteries and they would dig up these bodies. And they would oftentimes strip the body naked because it was illegal to steal possessions from the corpse, but not the body itself.
What?
Because there was no concept of the body being sort of property. So they would throw the clothes back into the grave. And they were really clever in the ways they did it. They usually sent a woman in the daytime to masquerade as a mourner. And she would kind of go through the graveyard and she would see where the fresh graves were, because, of course, you'd want the body to be as fresh as possible. And then at nighttime, they would go in there and they would dig up these bodies. And they could take as many as 12 bodies in a night. It was like hard labor. And it was very lucrative. Because the only legal bodies to dissect in Britain in the early 19th century were bodies of executed criminals, of people who had murdered other people. So specifically murders.
So if you went to to say goodbye to your Nana and drop some flowers on her grave and there's just a big hole in the ground.
Well, they would cover it up, but you do get these stories of people finding out that a body, so for instance, I think it was in 1785, this person goes to this graveyard and discovers that a body is missing, that a body has been snatched. And everybody in the village goes to this graveyard and digs up their relatives and drags these coffins back to their home until they could make the cemetery safer.
Oh my God.
Which is insane, because people were really feared this. And so yesterday on Twitter, I put up a picture of something called a cemetery gun. So they had these devices that they would put at the foot of the grave, and it had like a tripwire, and so you could set up the gun to shoot anybody.
Oh my God.
And there's actually a really awful story of a grieving father who this was set up at the grave, and he accidentally trips it and he gets shot. So, it wasn't exactly a safe way to protect the bodies, but they also had watchmen.
Look at
there
that.
There it is.
That's from your
That's
Instagram
from yesterday.
Or your Twitter feed.
That's Twitter, yeah. Everybody went nuts on that yesterday.
Cemetery gun. 19th century used to protect against body snatchers. That is so crazy. It's a musket.
Yeah, it was hardcore. I mean, you'd have to be quite wealthy as well to set something like that up at the foot of your relative's grave. They also used coffin collars, so that was sort of like an iron. It was a collar, and they would nail it to the bottom of the coffin. So that way, what a body snatcher would typically do is just open the foot of the grave. He wouldn't dig up the whole grave. He'd smash open the lid, and he'd have instruments to kind of drag the body out. Well, if the corpse is nailed to the bottom of the coffin, you're going to have a lot of trouble dragging that body out. So people, they did all kinds of things. They put these cages over the graves to protect them. So people, the internet, God bless it, will say to protect against vampire or to keep vampires from coming out. It had nothing to do with that, or zombies. It was to prevent body snatchers from getting a hold of those corpses. But those bodies.
Look at this.
Yeah, there they are. Mort safes, they were called.
Oh my God.
And you'll see them a lot in Britain. And people were very paranoid about this. I mean, you can find a lot of examples of this. And bodies were stolen a lot. And thank God they were on some level, right? Because think about how much we learned from these bodies. Bodies were needed to be dissected to teach medical students.
Yeah.
And one of the scenes in the book, I talk about the dead house. They called it the dead house. And everybody had a different experience in the dead house. There's probably people listening who've been in a dissection room, and you have a really vivid memory of that. It's probably bright and white and clinical. Well, these places, the bodies would have been bloated and partly decomposed. Dissecting bodies was dangerous because you could cut yourself and you could infect yourself with bacteria. They weren't wearing gloves. And so you get examples of people cutting themselves and dying within 48 hours. So going into medicine was dangerous. And there's a story in this book about a guy who goes into the dead house for the first time, and he freaks out, and he sees all these mice and rats and things like that eating the bodies. And so he jumps out the window and he runs off. But later he becomes accustomed to it, as we all become accustomed to horrible things at some point. And he actually starts taking pieces of the corpse and throwing it to the poor little starving creatures that are in the dead house. And
Jesus.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, that horror that we all experience possibly when we're confronted with death, to accepting it as you have to as a medical student if you want to go on. So the dead house is particularly, it would have smelled. Dissection would have been a winter sport because the bodies wouldn't decompose as quickly. You, of course, wouldn't want to be dissecting in the heat of the summer.
Right.
And
so did they literally have seasons for dissecting?
Yeah, they would tend to teach students in the winter. So
and
it was
did they
colder.
wear winter jackets and do
yeah,
it in a cold?
They would have probably, because they had a fireplace at the end of the room as well, make it really stuffy and smelly.
Right.
And you couldn't really predict what a person had died from as well. So remember, people are dying from things like smallpox, which is awful.
Yeah.
And this is before mass vaccinations. This is certainly before antibiotics. And so a lot of doctors or medical students die as a result of going into the profession.
Oh, wow. So are they getting it from these corpses, people that died?
They can get bacterial infections, certainly, and just being with patients. If a patient comes in with smallpox.
Of course.
And in smallpox, a lot of people, I don't know did I send you a picture of smallpox, Jamie? A lot of people think, it's like chickenpox. It's not like chickenpox. It's a really awful disease. And it's the only disease that we have eradicated ever in human history.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. So it's one of those ones. Yeah,
it's unbelievably bad.
Ooh, it makes me itch when I look at it as well.
It's horrific.
Very
you see
disfiguring.
Children with it. It's just, and it was so common.
It was very common. It was very feared as well because it was so disfiguring. And so if you were, for instance, a wealthy woman and you got smallpox and you were scarred, your family might worry that they couldn't marry you off. So, it was one of those diseases that left its mark on you literally. And it also had a high mortality rate as well. But it wasn't like chickenpox.
No.
There's my PSA.
Yeah,
it's not like chickenpox.
Well, it's it's one of those things that we're so thankful that people have figured out how to get rid of something.
Yeah, and smallpox vaccine was invented in the 18th century. Most people don't know it's that old.
That's incredible.
Yeah, Edward Jenner invented it, and actually the biggest anti-vaxxer movement or protest happened in the 19th century. 100,000 people turned out to march in Britain against Jenner. People thought that their children would turn into cows because he used cowpox, the virus cowpox, to bestow immunity onto people. And so there was this huge fear that, it was dirty to kind of insert this animal virus into people. And so there was this big protest, 100,000 people, to protest the fact that 6 parents had been jailed for not vaccinating their children. And so this story is much older than we think. And the fears that we have about vaccines are not that dissimilar to what people worried about in the past as well. But Jenner's an incredible figure.
That is incredible when you stop and think about the fact that this is still going on today with the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
With all the, I mean, you can find out. I mean, I had Dr. Peter Hotez on recently to talk about vaccines and the misconceptions that people have. And he explained that they've isolated a bunch of different environmental factors and genes that contribute to autism, but that it all takes place in the womb.
Right.
But people don't want to hear that.
No, I mean, and that is the danger of the way information is now spread, of course.
Echo chambers.
It is.
That's confirmation bias is the real danger. That
in the past, it wasn't. It was actually harder to get that message out, but a lot of you get famous sort of cartoons of people sort of turning into cows. So the cartoonists, my new husband is a cartoonist, and so it's like this powerful way of kind of conveying images and fears and stuff. And so yeah, people had that fear of vaccines for a long time. But Edward Jenner coming up with his vaccine undoubtedly saved millions of people's lives.
Undoubtedly, yeah. It's just so amazing that the problem is still around today. Even with all the information that we have available.
Yeah, I think, there was a Fox News newscaster who recently said that he doesn't wash his hands because he can't see germs. I don't know who it was.
I think he was joking.
Hopefully he was joking.
He said the next day he actually washes his hands.
I hope so. So people were sending that to me because, again, Lister.
Right.
And I always tell people, it is that idea of what you can't see. It's hard to convince people. Mm-hmm. And with Lister, if you think about it, here's this young guy and he's coming along and he's saying there's these invisible little creatures and they're killing your patients. And trust me, I have this really weird instrument called a microscope and I can see them. And it was a leap of faith. He was also accusing the older surgeons of inadvertently killing their patients because if they weren't washing their hands, they were leading to higher mortality rates.
So they probably fought against it as well.
Yeah, so there was huge pushback. So what Lister ultimately does is he turns to the younger generation and he changes their minds. And so it's a slow burn. It's not like, the movie moment, unfortunately, where it just happens all at once. And it takes quite a long time. And it's weird that it takes so long because if you think about him coming in 1876 to America, it's after the Civil War, people were dying, soldiers were dying of high infection rates. They were packing wounds with mud. I mean, they couldn't get worse than that, right? And so people were dying of all these kinds of infections. He comes to Philadelphia to convince the medical community, and speaker after speaker just denounces him on the first day. And then he gets up and he does his demonstrations and he starts to slowly change people's minds. But it takes a long time. The cover of the American book is the American version, I should say, is a famous painting by, I don't know if people can see that, by Samuel Gross. It's called The Gross Clinic. The guy in the middle, it is Gross as well, but the guy in the middle is Samuel Gross. And he so didn't believe in Lister that he would walk into the room and he'd slam the door and he'd say, there, Mr. Lister's germs can't get in anymore. And you can see in this that he's wearing his street clothes, he's sticking his dirty fingers into this wound. And there's a woman in the background and she's covering her face and she's the mother of the patient, and she's wearing black because she expects her son to die. Oh. So this is the U.S. cover, and for the U.K. cover, I think I sent that to you, Jamie. I sent you a picture of both covers side by side. It's another painting by Eakins, and it was done within 10 years, and it's called the Agnew Clinic, and it's totally different because the doctors are wearing white. There's a sense that they understand germs. There's a sense that antisepsis is being used there. So that kind of before and after shot in such a short period that Lister is able to change the world.
What made you choose different covers for the UK and the US version?
Well, so that's actually writers don't. Oh, there you go. So you can see. So Penguin published it in the UK, so they've stylized the original painting, but you kind of get a sense of what it would have looked like. And actually, you have women appearing in the operating theater professionally as nurses. So this is after the Florence Nightingale revolution as well. So it still looks different to the way we operate, but you can definitely see a difference between those two paintings.
Can you refresh my memory on the Florence Nightingale revolution?
So Florence Nightingale is in this book a little bit. People always wonder why I didn't speak about her as much, but actually she didn't believe in germs at first. She thought Lister was quite hysterical with his idea of germs, but she was working towards sanitation in hospitals. So they're working towards the same goal, but just with slightly different tactics. So she revolutionizes nursing to make it a more respectable profession. Before then, nurses, you wouldn't want your daughter becoming a nurse if you were from a well-respected family because she would be privy to the male body. So you wouldn't want her interacting with male patients. So really kind of lowly, poor women went into nursing. And it wasn't really a respected profession until Florence Nightingale comes along, and there's this sort of revolution. So the revolution is not just about the profession, though, but it's about the sanitation reforms that she brings about in the hospitals. So you see that on the cover as well. But there's also another guy. I'm sure there's I always sort of predict comments. I shouldn't think about, what people are going to say, but people tend to get mad, when I give lectures, because I don't talk about this guy. There's groupies out there that love this physician named Semmelweis, and I do talk about him in the book a little bit. So Semmelweis was this...
Groupies?
I call them groupies, Semmelweis groupies, because every time I give a talk, there's always one person who asks this question, and I have to smile to myself, and I'm like, here it is. And they say, well, I think you'll find you haven't talked about Semmelweis. Semmelweis was practicing in Austria, and he was putting this idea together that if you wash your hands and you go onto the hospital wards, infection rates went down. And he was ridiculed heavily. They called him the hand washer. And he ends up being put in an insane asylum. And it's this really kind of sad, weird death that he has. And he's really sort of persecuted for these ideas of hand washing and infection rates. He's doing it a little bit before Lister comes onto the scene. Lister's not aware of Semmelweis's work. But equally, I always tell people that Semmelweis doesn't really do it first if we're going to play that game, because again, there's a difference between the basic sanitation and then understanding why you're implementing it. So until you understand that germs exist, it doesn't make sense. You can't really convince people. And that's where Lister comes in. He takes Louis Pasteur's germ theory, and he's able to convince people in the medical community that germs exist. So until we understand, again, why wash your hands if they're just going to get dirty?
That's amazing. So again, why did you have two different covers?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So the publisher just picks whatever covers they want, basically. So my U.S. publisher had come up with this. My U.K. publisher came up with a cover I didn't like that much. And so I said, well, why don't we use the second Eakins painting so that they're in conversation with one another? So I like that they kind of complement one another.
I like the font better on the U.S. cover.
I know. I love this Victorian font.
And I think the image of that guy wearing street clothes is just more
It's so evocative. I know. It's just this cover actually, so it's been translated, I think, into about 15 languages now. So most of them kind of take this image. I was wondering if you knew what this might be. It's a circular metal contraption with teeth on the inside for people who are just listening.
I have no idea. What is that?
So this is called a jugum penis. This is a Victorian anti-masturbation device.
What?
So, yay, there's the real one. This is a prop that I use for under the knife. That's the real one. So what would happen is if the person got an erection, it would clamp down and obviously kill the erection pretty quickly.
Can I see that?
Yeah. That's one we made for the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's basically similar to
it's similar. If you see the one on the screen, it has a spring device.
So why were they trying to get people to stop masturbating?
So the Victorians were obsessed with masturbation.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of people out there who know that Kellogg's cornflakes came out of this sort of obsession with masturbation.
Please tell people that story. We heard it from Dr. Chris Ryan.
Oh, it's so funny. Well, it's funny in a ha-ha kind of horrifying way. Kellogg was obsessed with masturbation. He thought that a lot of his patients were suffering from all kinds of mental ailments and physical ailments because they were masturbating too much. And he thought that a diet bland and high in fiber would kind of kill the fire in the belly. And so he invented what became Kellogg's cornflakes.
How strange.
But his brother was the one who commercialized it, and his brother's like, we should add sugar. And Dr. Kellogg was like, no, people be masturbating all the time. We can't add sugar, And they had this split, and Kellogg's cornflakes became the commercial version with the delicious sugar added in.
So that was the brother's idea.
It was the brother's idea to add the sugar and make it sort of delicious.
Wow.
That was illustrated by my husband. We do all kinds of...
He did that?
Yeah, for the YouTube.
Oh, so that's not original.
No.
Worried your son and heir is becoming a dirty little self-abuser? Stop all contemptible. Is this an actual text from...
Yeah, I don't know if he
13
based
Cock
that
Lane?
Yeah.
I doubt it.
There is a Cock Lane in London, though.
I bet there is. Stop all contemptible onanism? What is onanism?
Masturbating and...
Onanism? Have you ever heard that? With the infallible and modestly priced jugum penis. So was that a common thing during the Victorian era?
So, you get, the idea that masturbating is bad for your health goes to the 18th century. We kind of tend to think about it as a Victorian obsession because it becomes more and more accepted idea in medical terms, but
that it's bad for you.
That it's bad for you, and you get these like sort of drawings of men like languishing on the couch because they masturbated too much or whatever.
There's a lot of dudes out there right now that can relate.
Probably in the so out of energy, you know. They just need the jugum penis.
Yes.
And also there's another one I sent you, Jamie. I think the sort of like looks like a flaccid penis.
Was another one?
This is really high. Yeah, they came in all shapes and sizes, and
oh boy.
Yeah, like now it would probably just be there.
And you're supposed to pee out of that?
Yeah, maybe you could.
Seems like there's holes at the end of it. Like you have to just. Oh my God! Imagine what that thing smelled like. Oh Christ! And look at that ball at the bottom with the hook. That seems super uncomfortable. Like where does that thing sits in between your legs?
I don't know.
So it must be like a hook where you could strap it in.
Strap it in, yeah.
That's like a Thai steel cup.
I don't know who's coming on the show afterwards, but they got a lot
Ron
of.
Funches.
They got okay.
The good news is Ron is a hilarious comedian, so we're all good. We might have to redo the entire show just with Ron and get his take on all this stuff.
Yeah, just show him I'll just leave these objects behind and
God, the cup is it's so gross.
It is gross.
And the fact you had to pee out of those, it looked like a spaghetti strainer at the end of it.
I thought, when I was going on the show, I'm like, what can I bring Joe Rogan that's going to, stimulate the conversation and anti-masturbation device. It's always a crowd pleaser.
Well, with men, it's always an issue.
A fascination,
so they thought that it was causing all these ailments. They thought it was causing all these different problems.
Yeah, and graham crackers as well. Come out of that. So Reverend Graham was also obsessed with masturbation, just like Kellogg, and so he created this sort of dry, tasteless biscuit. So everybody, crumbling them into their.
Meanwhile, little did he know that someone would invent s'mores.
Yeah,
and make
exactly.
It pretty
now
fucking
everybody's.
Awesome. You add marshmallows and chocolate.
Or the graham cracker pie crust, right? So we're just like now, I don't know if it works, if people feel like that's helping them with their masturbation problems, but hey, leave a comment.
Well, it's just crazy that most people have no idea that was the origin of this stuff.
I know, that's what's so funny, There's so many, like Listerine, graham crackers, Kellogg, cornflakes, all this kind of stuff that has sort of a medical background
and
to
wasn't
it.
there a medical background in the term hysterical? That hysterical was related to women.
Yeah, the idea that the womb wanders, like so people thought that the female womb was like an animal in and of itself, which I don't, and it would move around the body, and so they would even do things like they would smoke it back into place. They'd put like
smoke.
They would put like incense and all kinds of things to kind of like get it, like coax it back into place. I can't even imagine that people are going to start following me after this based off of these.
Don't worry
these
about
weird
it.
Stories.
They're coming.
Come to my platform. I have tons of different
In
stories
droves.
like this.
But there was a time where women would go to the doctor to get stimulated as well, right? Is that true?
Oh,
or
gosh,
is that...
So this is like a little bit out of my expertise. I think that's been proven to be false, actually. But there was, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, that there was a Victorian idea that a woman had to orgasm in order to become pregnant.
Yes.
So that was an important part of it.
That wasn't just a Victorian thing. I'm pretty sure they taught me that in high school.
What? Are you serious?
Yes.
What high school is this? Or like,
exactly.
If you want to get a woman pregnant, make sure
it was
she
part
orgasms.
of the idea was that part of the male orgasming inside the woman was what led to her having an orgasm, which led to her getting pregnant.
That is weird. Well, there was. I think there was like a.
Might have completely remembered this incorrectly. Again, I was probably 15 at the time.
Oh well, there you go. But there was someone. I think it was like a senator or Congress. I live in the UK now, so I'm not as up to date with all the crazy stuff going on over here. But I think there was like a senator who said this again. This idea that a woman had to like orgasm, meaning undermining the idea that you couldn't be raped unless you had an orgasm, which was a Victorian
I remember
belief.
That. Yeah. I think that was really recently.
Yeah, I think it was like in the last year. I hate to say it.
Jesus Christ.
Like,
I really do remember. I mean,
I should just be like in the background popping up, and like I could have like a sign that says 18th century or 19th century. You know,
Right.
like where did that idea come from originally? And that's
I do have this weird, vague memory that was the way that
that you were taught.
I don't know. It's too weird because I don't remember. I don't. It's too vague. You know.
It does sound too weird. Like I picture you went to like a really Victorian
No,
school.
I
And
went to a place called Newton South, and it's a suburb of Boston. Really nice school. Nothing wrong with it.
other than
I don't remember.
other than your sex ed.
I'm not sure if that was.
And
it's
did they
too
pass out
weird.
the jug and penis
No,
as
they
well
didn't.
after?
They did smack our hands
Yeah.
though. They caught us masturbating.
Good, yeah.
No, so, but why were people so obsessed with that? Why were they so self-pleasuring?
Yeah, and I think that again, you look at that sort of buttoned-up Victorian mentality.
Didn't they put like dresses over the legs of pianos and chairs and stuff like that?
Oh, I don't know about that.
I think they did.
Because it would have been provocative, or would they make you think
there might be more bullshit that I remember, but I really do
Everybody
remember
fact check
something
that
along.
one.
I think we
Yeah.
fact checked this before. I just did
It's
it again.
horseshit, right?
Yeah, it says it's not real.
Okay, but
Oh,
it is
there we
some. Oh, okay. You know what? I remember where I heard it from. I heard it from Terrence McKenna. It was one of the things he talked about during one of his speeches. That's right. We did fact check that.
I mean, we like to think that the past is really different from us, which it is in some ways. But, again, like we still share some similar fears. And the masturbation thing, actually, the last thing I want to show you that I brought is this. So this
What is that?
This is a urine wheel that would have dated to the medieval period.
Oh, my God.
And so the idea was that the doctor could diagnose you according to the color of your urine. Spoiler alert, if your urine's black, you're probably in big trouble.
You got robbed, though.
And they didn't just look at the color, they tasted the urine as well.
Hilarious.
So and they could diagnose diabetes because someone with diabetes, their urine tastes sweet. So they were actually diagnosing diabetes.
Oh, Christ.
Yeah,
So
there
they
you
were
go. That's the
drinking
one we
piss.
based it off. Yep.
Oh, my God.
But my favorite part of the urine in the medieval period and doctors with urine, some practitioners would take the urine and put it into a divination bowl, and they could tell your future. And I think they should bring that back. Like, at the end of your checkup, not to be covered by insurance, but, out of pocket.
If they test your urine and you're totally dehydrated and there's blood in there, like, yeah. bro, you ain't going to make it.
Yeah. You don't even have to do the divination bowl. You don't have to do that.
Well, it's weird that image in the whole circle, the center circle, like that a guy is the doctor holding the flask.
Yes. So,
is that the doctor?
Yep, that would be the doctor holding the flask. And actually,
it's like a wine taster.
He is like a wine taster.
Around.
I did a whole, again, a YouTube video on this, which is why I have this stupid prop. And we cut through images. And that image of the doctor holding the flask was sort of the predominant image of a physician up into a certain period. Now it's sort of like the stethoscope is the object now that we associate with doctors.
Right.
But
the flask used to be.
The urine flask used to be it. And
that
they were called
it.
Yeah, they were called
the urine
piss prophets.
flask and a doctor's pole.
Yeah.
Or a barber pole.
Yeah. And the plague mask.
Oh my God.
But they used to call them piss prophets because they tell your fortune using your urine. So
oh my God.
I think that is something we should bring back. I think you have the power to bring that back.
Well, you know what? If there's tarot card readers, why not piss prophets?
Yeah.
At least piss prophets are basing it on something.
Yeah. Throw your urine into that divination bowl. I know there's so many images of the doctor holding the flask, and
that is
crazy.
crazy.
Obviously, like the color of your urine could be an indicator of health. It still is today.
Oh yeah, and look at the guy. He's like, "What do you think, doc?
Yeah,
how am I doing?"
I know.
He looks like he's hurting.
Very, very
There's
worried.
gotta be
yeah,
some piss prophs in LA.
Probably.
Los Feliz.
They're gonna open up a store right now. Look at the Band-Aid around the guy's head.
Yeah,
like he's hurting. The guy's got a head injury, and the doctor's checking
Nothing
his piss.
good. Yeah.
What's the next image? What's going on there?
I think he's pulling a tooth. Yeah.
Oh Christ.
Yeah, actually, the barbers, when they pulled teeth, that sometimes they would have a drum in the shop, and it would get louder as they got closer to pulling the tooth, which would make me more anxious.
Oh my God.
And the barber shop was a male domain because you'd also get advice on sexual diseases because, of course, everybody had like syphilis. Oh,
right.
So this is a fake nose. So everybody sort of lost their noses.
What?
Yeah.
How'd they lose their nose? They're a tiny
Okay,
ass
so something
nose.
you probably don't Something you probably don't know about syphilis. I don't know if we have that image of syphilis that I sent. Poor Jamie. I told your booking manager, Matt Staggs, I said, send these images to Jamie and don't tell him any context. You know, and be like, what the hell is this podcast going to be on? But
they lost their noses?
Yeah, they lost their
syphilis?
noses. So syphilis attacks sort of the soft tissue. And the image that I sent through, which you'll show in a minute, the guy has holes in his scalp as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's a photograph.
That is a photograph from the 19th century.
Oh, my God.
So
it ate right through his head.
He held onto his nose, though, so you could just cover that with a hat.
Oh, I guess.
But it was incredibly painful. And Al Capone had syphilis, and so you lost your mind. It attacked the soft tissues, attacked the brain. It was really... So people today, you know, I'll show these images on my Instagram or Twitter, and people will be like, wow, I didn't know syphilis was so bad. It's like people died from it all the time.
Well, syphilis is also responsible for powdered wigs. You know that story, right?
No.
Oh, you
from
don't?
The 18th century. No.
Oh, I got something for you then.
Yeah, you got something.
When it was, I forget, some noble person got syphilis and started wearing a wig.
Yeah.
And when they started wearing wigs, other people started emulating them because they were the celebrities of the kingdom.
I feel like this is a drunk history.
No, this is real. Okay. This is legitimate. And the more wealthy you were, like, because syphilis makes your hair fall out as well.
Yeah.
I mean, your teeth fall out.
Yeah.
And so the more wealthy you were, the bigger and taller your wig would be. That is where the term big wigs comes from.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that in the 18th century that the wigs were getting bigger as the fashions.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my husband illustrated a book called the Gin Lane Gazette, and as it's sort of like an 18th century newspaper, and as the newspaper moves on, the women would have to sit at the bottom of the carriage because their wigs were so high in some cases.
Wow.
But
I wonder if the women had syphilis.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
For
absolutely.
sure.
Because it would be passed on, or
so that's probably why they had wigs as well.
yeah, and with syphilis, you know, your nose fell off, and it was so prevalent in the 19th century that they had no nose clubs. So people would get together, and they would in London. They would cheer the fact that we
lost our nose.
We lost our nose. We have syphilis.
So they couldn't smell anything either.
No, I mean, it was awful. And actually, one of the ways that they treated syphilis was through mercury, which is very poisonous.
Terrific.
And so when you talk about the loss
No Nose Club? Writers in London.
I don't know if that's the No Nose Club, but...
Yeah, they might have STDs, though, it says.
Yeah. They're all just standing there with top hats and underwear.
Yeah.
Pull up the thing, though, about bigwigs. So I can show her.
Do you see that one right up there? Oh yeah, that's from mine. If you go up, Jamie, and go...
This one?
Yes. So that man didn't lose his nose to syphilis, but that's an early form of rhinoplasty that dates back to the Renaissance. And you'd have to stay in that position for weeks while that grafted. I believe this man was injured.
This guy had a cut of his, for people just listening, there's a slice off of his arm that's connected to his nose, and they have taped and strapped his arm to the top of his head. So he has to stay in this position while the chunk of his arm grows into his face, and then they're going to cut it and remove it when it develops its own blood supply.
It's like The Nick. If people have watched that show, The Nick, they have a scene with this. So, yeah, it would have been so uncomfortable.
You might be better off with no nose.
Yeah, you might be better off. And mercury, of course, you would lose your teeth, and it just really awful kinds of things they did with mercury.
It just didn't work.
No, and
how long did that last for, the mercury thing?
All the way into the 19th century.
Jesus.
And so there's a phrase...
After a bunch of people died, when they go, hey, guys, this mercury...
People are still cupping, you know?
What are we basing this on? Yeah, okay. Syphilis hidden between powder wigs. Syphilis epidemic in the late 1500s. Europe left people with patchy hair loss. Go to the actual... whose it was. So these noblemen... They were all gross, disgusting people with STDs. What is the name of the guy? Hold on. Don't scroll. Go back up. Here it... Yeah, okay, there it is.
Oh, Louis XIV.
Louis XIV, only 17, his mom started thinking, worried the baldness might hurt his reputation. Louis hired 48 wig makers to save his image. 5 years later, but if you scroll down...
Both men likely had syphilis.
Yes, both men likely had syphilis. So this is what started it all out.
that's interesting.
Yeah,
they were
that's-
hideous too. Like,
Well, they
I
were
mean,
so-
to our modern sensibilities, like that just looks so bizarre.
Well, not only, yeah, I mean, everything's gross, right? No one's washing themselves.
Yeah, this is
They don't
this
know
is
what
what
germs
I mean.
are. They
People
have
think it was great.
syphilis.
They watch a Hollywood movie. They're like, "Oh, it'd be so beautiful to live in the past." No, it would
People
have
are such
smelled.
assholes with that. That drives me crazy when people want to pretend
Romanticize that it was
Look,
so lovely
There are
and-
terrible things about life today. There absolutely
Yeah.
are. But this is the best time to be alive
Yeah.
ever, by
Yeah.
far.
Yeah, people say, "Is this the best time medically?" And it's like, well, hopefully that's always true, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully tomorrow is better than, hopefully we're advancing and learning more and everything. I mean, I think that we shouldn't look at science and medicine as totally linear, like that we're progressing towards something, but that obviously we're learning from what doesn't work, and like that's why I said failure is a huge part of what I love to talk about on YouTube and stuff, because we just don't talk about it enough in life and science and medicine and all the things that fail and help us get to where we are today.
Well, Lindsey, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing this awesome book, and thank you for your amazing Twitter feed. I've been spending many moments freaking the fuck out reading your stuff
Thank
and
you
watching
so
your
much.
images. I'm really happy you could come down here and share all this stuff with us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Tell people how to get a hold of you on Instagram, how they can check out your feed.
Okay. I'm Dr. Lindsey Fitzharris on Instagram and Dr. Lindsey Fitz on Twitter and Under the Knife on YouTube. And the book is The Butchering Art. You can get it on Amazon. I'd really love it if you bought it.
They're going to buy it. I guarantee you.
Joe Rogan said
really
buy
good.
it.
It's really good. It's really good. It'll freak you out.
Excellent.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Lindsey.
you so much.
Bye, everybody.